In this Warhammer and Classics video, I'll be talking about Soren Kierkegaard's concept of repetition and how it can be applied to Warhammer. Not long ago, I made a video about diminishing language, discussing how the very term Warhammer had become too familiar over time. Now, this video touches on kind of a similar theme. Now, Kierkegaard is a 19th century Danish philosopher and social critic whose ideas have inspired many other great thinkers. Among his many works, he wrote a short book called Repetition, published in 1843. This is a complicated book with many different themes on motion and other narratives important to existential thinking. But repetition at its core is the urge and desire to reignite the singular intensity and passion of a specific moment in time. Kind of an effort to rekindle that feeling when you experience something extraordinary for the first time. So, distinguish between hope, memory, and repetition, Kierkegaard uses clothing as an analogy. He writes in Repetition, "Hope is a new garment, started and stiff and glittering. Yet one has never had it, and hence one does not know how it will become one, and how it fits. Recollection is a discarded garment, which, beautiful as it may be, does not fit, for one has outgrown it. Repetition is an imperishable garment, which fits snugly and comfortable, neither too tight nor too loose. Hope is a charming maiden that slips through the fingers. Recollection is a beautiful old woman, but of no use at the instant. Repetition is a beloved wife of whom no one tires. It requires youth to hope, youth to recollect, but it requires courage to will repetition." Now, throughout the book, Kierkegaard describes a character who continually tries to recreate those initial moments of excitement when you truly experience something for the first time. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter if the character recreates the setting and activity in exactly the same way as the first time. The effort can really never recapture that intensity, right? He fails, and he fails repeatedly. So it's kind of like multiple times you go to the movies or something like that. Those first experiences of the first time you had that certain type of food, or the first time you went to that restaurant, or those early days of a relationship or something like that, they're really difficult to rekindle. Even though you might go back to that same restaurant multiple times, or go back to the movie theaters, it doesn't quite add up to the experience you had when you were in your youth, right? So let's bring this concept back to our hobby. And channeling Kierkegaard, I'm asking if repetition is possible in Warhammer. Is the gaming and hobby experience enhanced or diminished by being repeated? And I think a lot about repetition in this hobby because so many hobbyists are mired in nostalgia for the early days. And for many gamers, the hobby can never be as good as when they first joined, right? This is the kind of vibrant and still very active old Hammer crowd that elect to play older versions of the game and collect only the older models. But many of us fall, I think, into this trap where we're just looking for something that can rekindle the enthusiasm we had when we first entered the hobby, or first played a game, or first observed the game. And it's difficult. So I think even if you're a gamer really enthralled by every new release, you're still trapped in the cycle of repeated editions, rules, lore, and narratives. Each book beyond the first you bought is in some way an attempt at repetition, right? Like every time, if you are really, like me, excited by like that first Space Marine Codex you ever bought, and I remember buying that book and just poring over every single page. Every time a new Space Marine Codex comes out, it's still interesting, but it doesn't have that level of awe that first book did, right? the first time you see those images and that type of artwork and you read the language for the first time. Every other codex since then, there are slight changes, but it's largely just a rehash of those same motifs. Now, the cycle of releases has only increased over the past 2 decades. And it's simply a fact that editions and rules do not last as long as they once did. Right? We're looking at editions that maybe last 2 or 3 years as opposed to 5, 6, or 7. Army books, in some cases, can only last 1 or 2 years, where in the past, again, thinking of Bretonnians, thinking of a few others, they lasted several years. And naturally, this type of release cycle is a very profitable move by Games Workshop. Everyone continually has to pick up the latest books in order to continue to play the game. But if repetition is a problem, then the rate of releases only compounds the issue. If you're kind of a new player today, you're really presented with an abundance of riches. If you only have interest in 1 or 2 armies, waiting several years for an update is thankfully a thing of the past. But if you're someone like myself who perhaps has too many interests, the rate of releases is kind of a type of unfortunate treadmill. We are kind of like the character in Kierkegaard's book that regularly sought to find the normal and familiar once again exciting, and like him, we repeatedly fail at the attempt. So here are some possible solutions to the problem, because I don't think we're mired in this problem. I think it requires a change in your perspective, in your expectation, I think, in order to solve this potential problem. And so see the trees from the forest, kind of the opposite here of the traditional phrase, and really focus on kind of the singular releases that matter to you the most, and ignore the rest. If there's a game or faction that you really like, play that and enjoy it to its fullest. This type of solution is directed towards people like myself that are probably too often omni collectors. They try to collect kind of everything, and you ultimately end up collecting nothing. And the breadth of the hobby cannot simply be enjoyed to its fullest at this point. There simply isn't the time or money in the world to do that anymore. Now, this isn't kind of the best of solutions, but it might help to kind of focus on this specific experience that you want to recreate. Right? Focus on what you're trying to do rather than just try to take everything in at the same time. So another possible solution here, and this is really lies within Games Workshop itself. Perhaps it is best to not try to rekindle a time-tested experience, but instead introduce something genuinely new and different. Try to have a brand new experience for the first time. It had all the initial hurt and anguish of a true cataclysm, but nothing excited me more than the creation of Age of Sigmar. Right? Kind of a breath of fresh air in new rules and armies. And since then, a genuine living narrative that has consequences on the world going forward. And veterans like myself can look back at pride at having fought through the Realm Gate Wars and now the Soul Wars. And the future is new and unexpected. Now that really provides brand new experiences here. And I really do feel like Age of Sigmar, even though for some people it's kind of the antithesis of repetition, it's the exact opposite of what they wanted. For me, it was a brand new experience and kind of a new starting point from which I can look forward to future releases. For 40K, the Games Workshop is naturally hesitant to experiment as far as they did with Age of Sigmar for good reasons. They don't want to experiment with something that is so vital to the success of their business. But we have still seen some massive changes in rules and narrative. I was very excited to see kind of 8th edition mirror a lot of what Age of Sigmar was doing. And narratively speaking, there's been some massive change in the years compared to the years prior to the Gathering Storm campaign. That's good, but I want to see more. Right? I want them to push that a little more aggressively if they can. Now, both worlds, once continually existed at the precipice of the end times. And I think it's only been positive that they move forward. Now, when it comes to the release cycle, I don't want to just see new codexes and army books with minor changes in rules and points, right? I think that is the onset of nihilism to some extent, right? Where that's when you can legitimately argue, like, why are you making me pay another $35 for a book, right? When basically I could get the same changes on like an Excel sheet, right? Games Workshop needs to really differentiate between the books so that it is, a very genuine, new and different play experience every time you buy a new book, right? And that will at least encourage or lend itself to a new experience. And the same army, but really make the same or more substantive change. So another solution is to simply change your habits. Change the army you're playing, right? If you're tired of one, pick something else. Now, people obviously naturally do this, right? They're not just following my advice by listening to my video and going, oh, that's the solution. But honestly, this is one way to get beyond that repetition cycle of creating a new experience by the same game, but a different army, a different play style. If you're tired of 40k, you can play something like Kill Team. If you're tired of Age of Sigmar, you could play Warcry or Underworlds. Simply taking a break, or even just taking a break from the hobby, will allow you to refocus and reprioritize the experience you want when you come back in. Think of parallels here. Like if you take, you really do take food for granted, unless you've been actively on like a prolonged fast, right? And then when you come back, even the simplest of meals can seem absolutely exquisite. This is that type of thing, right? Changing your habit can kind of reignite the passion. Same thing, like if, it's only because you work throughout the week that you enjoy the time off on the weekend. Something like myself, who has had sometimes months or years when you're not working, believe me, weekends absolutely mean nothing in that context. So the same principle applies to wargaming in general. Take some time off, come back to it, and you'll be able to recreate that kind of initial sense of joy and wonder as the game has changed, it's a little progressed. It's not something you're used to. So one of the core problems here is memory. If something cannot be created, then kind of active forgetting is an option, but it's one that most people can't not choose. I think often when it comes to this problem of memory, and one of the correlations with something like repetition is the work of Nietzsche, kind of a contemporary of Kierkegaard, although they never actually really met each other or really had their work overlap too much. In 1874, though, Nietzsche began writing on the use and abuse of history for life, and he quotes the words of Goethe, and he says, "I despise everything which merely instructs me without increasing or immediately enlivening my activity." And Nietzsche writes that we need history or memory in this case, but we also wish to use it in only so far as it serves living. And when he begins the work, he writes about a herd of cattle that lives without memory in this kind of pseudo-blissful existence. And I quote, "To witness this is hard for man, because he boasts to himself that his human race is better than the beast, and yet looks with jealousy at its happiness." And then further on, "One day the man demands of the beast, 'Why do you not talk to me about your happiness and only gaze at me?' And the beast wants to answer too and say, 'That is because I always immediately forget what I wanted to say.' But by then the beast has already forgotten his response and remains silent, so that the man wonders once more. But the man also wonders about himself, that he is not able to learn to forget, and that he hangs on to the past things. No matter how far or how fast you run, this chain runs with him." Now, this is kind of written, Nietzsche is a classicist first and foremost. This is a time when he was still teaching about the classics, and so it's about kind of antiquarian history and how we can never break ourselves from the historical link. If you think back to previous human civilizations that did not have an established history, things become much more dynamic, much more interesting to some extent. History is very, very vital and important to modern civilization, but it also has this crutch, right, where we're constantly kind of comparing ourselves to it. I had this really good, I'm going off a little bit of a tangent here, but I had this really good conversation when I was in Greece, talking to someone there, and asking him about, can Greece ever eclipse its past, or is it just kind of engulfed by constantly preserving and celebrating its past? And it's a really difficult conversation, I think, for kind of modern Greeks to kind of tackle with, because I don't know if it's even possible. But now I have this, speaking about memory myself and the rules and the games, I have a really great memory, but my wife does not. Right? And that's not a hit on her at all. And the same for movies and for many other things. And I remember in detail every single aspect of a movie, especially when it gets started. Based on the first frame, I can think, oh yeah, now I remember what happens here. My wife does not. And for her, watching a movie like that is just a brand new experience, right? She's completely forgotten what the whole plot was. And we should really want to forget kind of the bad memories of life and cherish those that are good and inspirational. And someone who forgets everything is somewhat dysfunctional, but those that have kind of a photographic memory are also living in some rather tortured existence. They can't piece things together to draw lessons and to learn from the things. This is simply to say that history or memory is both a gift and a curse, and there's really a golden mean here that we want to achieve. So if I can, I should try to forget the past for what it happened, right? Stop yearning for those initial moments. Let those exist as they once did. Celebrate, cherish them, but not kind of expect them in some way. And rather just embrace the moment for what it is. Enjoy the game for what it is today. So what do you guys think? Is repetition a problem? Do people constantly urge or desire that initial experience? I know a lot of people really want a relaunch of a game that they once used to love. And my response to that is, you have that game. You can play it today, right? Whatever you get in a relaunch will not be that game. It will be slightly different, right? The rules writers will imprint themselves into the game. It will not be just a rehashed or republished version of that game. It will be something new and different, but it probably won't rekindle what you're expecting. So, is there a viable solution to this problem? In either case, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please consider supporting the channel by commenting on the video, hitting that little like button, and subscribing for more Warhammer content.